Well, let me say, I think we all have to hit the continue button.
Mhm.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Sadia Pekkanen, co-director of the University of Washington's Space Policy and Research Center. And on behalf of Spark, as well as the other co-director, Christy Morganson, I want to welcome you all to this session of the UW Space Dialogues. And I also want to begin by thanking our sponsors, Salal Credit Union, for their support of Spark and these series of space dialogues. And of course, a shout out to our critical infrastructure, Amy Sprague and David Wilson, who always keep the infrastructure running so well. Some house rules. I think this audience is very well acquainted with the way that we run things, but if I could please ask you to turn off your mics when the general speaks. Today's speaker, it's a great privilege for me to introduce Lieutenant General Nina Armagno, who is the Director of Staff, Headquarters, the United States Space Force. In this position, she is responsible for the way that I think about this as the 4 Ps, as I think of them: policy, plans, positions, and procedures for the U.S. Space Force headquarters staff. Just a little bit of background on her. She earned her commission and graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy and has over 32 plus years of operational experience as a career space operator. She has won numerous major awards and decorations. Among them, let me just mention a few. There are far too many to mention all of them. But these include the Air Force Achievement Award, the Air Force Meritorious Unit Award, the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award with 3 oak leaf clusters. She has also won the 2010 Women of Influence Award, as well as the 2014 O'Malley Distinguished Space Leadership Award. General Armagno is the only person to have commanded both launch wings in the United States Air Force, and she is, I believe, the first woman general officer commissioned in the United States Space Force. As you can see, she is in an ideal position to share her thoughts from her perch on the 4 Ps, as it were, on the evolution of the U.S. Space Force and trajectories forward. Welcome, General Armagno, to the University of Washington. The floor is yours. Share some remarks and then we'll take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pekkanen, for that great introduction. I really appreciate you inviting me and Spark inviting me to speak and share my thoughts. Also, Professor Morganson and Amy Sprague as well, who is, I think, the mastermind behind the operation. I appreciate being invited today. So what I'd like to do is just start by saying I probably don't have to tell this audience that space is so crucial to the United States. It is part of the American way of life. It is also part of the American way of war. In life, you know, it's integral to what we call our modern life, our modern capabilities. It's integral to our national security, our prosperity, and our scientific achievements. And we can be very proud of all of that. It's also critical to the joint warfight, the joint warfighter, the joint force, because we provide exquisite capabilities from space that enable them to be the best fighting force in the world. Talking about precision navigation and timing like GPS. We provide secure satellite communications. We provide missile warning and weather, all from space. But there's a threat, and this threat is very real. Both Russia and China are working on capabilities and making them operational. The threat is something that we can dive into deeply in Q&A if you'd like to. But I'll just say here that by the year 2025, Russia and China are going to be able to threaten every satellite in every orbital regime. And that's, as you know, in low Earth orbit, about 1,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, our weather satellites are there, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance satellites. The medium Earth orbit, home of GEO, at about 20,000 kilometers is threatened as well. And then GEO, our geosynchronous, that is when you talk about terrain, that is location, location, location for our most strategic assets, our most high valued assets. Of course, our strategic missile warning capabilities and our strategic military satellite communications capabilities. So the nation had to act, and I believe they did, by establishing the United States Space Force. It's our responsibility to stand up and protect and defend this new domain. It has been termed a new warfighting domain. Nobody wants war to go into space, but if it does, we need to be, exclusively thinking about it and working to protect and defend the capabilities that we have. So the United States Space Force was stood up on the 20th of December in 2019. And our mission is threefold: to protect the interests of the United States in space. Number two, to deter aggression in, from, and to space. And to continue, of course, to conduct space operations. Those are the capabilities I mentioned before. Of course, we also do launch. We're very good at our launch mission. We do electronic warfare missions and also space domain awareness. And as we build up as a new service here, we're going to be looking at new types of mission areas for the military, such as orbital warfare. What does that mean? And battle management, which would go hand in hand, and how you command and control capabilities through conflict. So it's going to be very important for space to continue to project power, or at least to provide the capabilities that we do today through conflict. We're going to, we're part of the joint team. There's no mission or operation that the Joint Force does without space, and therefore we're going to have to prevail, preceding a conflict, through conflict, and then thereafter. We need to protect and defend our high value assets and figure out how to do so. Part of the how is to build resilient constellations. I think many of you know that today we're very vulnerable. We have stovepiped capabilities where, there's a particular type of satellite that can only talk to one ground station, and then only specific user equipment can utilize the information. So the future would be to diversify the capabilities and take a single mission area, for example, and diversify the capabilities that we have coming from space into various orbits, different types of satellites providing that capability, and just create resilience on orbit, create resilience on the ground, where you have operations centers and ground stations that can command and control multiple types of satellites and multiple types of missions. We're working on that. And then, of course, the cybersecurity and the links in between, satellite to ground and ground to user equipment. At some point, we're going to have to, if you think about surviving through an initial attack with defenses and with resilience, just to be honest, we're going to have to start thinking about what do offenses look like? How can we provide an offensive punch, which, that capability will enable to deter a potential future aggression as well. And then there are new missions that may go into space naturally, because there's access to space. Potentially access to space gets easier over time, and therefore, who knows what types of missions would want to move to the space domain to be conducted for any of our service partners. So those are the kinds of things that I believe the Space Force was established to do. And that's exactly the kind of stuff we're working on. So very quickly, a year one roundup here. We've been very busy, and it's been quite a year. And when you look back on it, we've got a lot of things done. And I just want to give some anecdotal comments. In the spring, when we first announced that we were going to hire, I think we had something like 41 civilian positions that we had advertised. And for those 41 positions, we got 5,722 applications. And so that was pretty cool. In the summer, we began transferring Air Force military positions into the Space Force. And so we were holding our first transfer boards, and we had to review over 9,000 applications to transfer into the Space Force. Today, we have, of those 9,000 applications, we're up to 4,377 military. That's our end strength today. And it's on the way to only 6,000. And we're only going to be a small force with 6,000 military and about 10,000 civilians. So that's only 16,000. I mean, we have been purposefully designed to be small, mission focused, and that'll make us agile. We graduated 86, this was back in April now. They graduated early due to the pandemic, but 86 Air Force Academy cadets directly commissioned into the Space Force. They were commissioned to the Space Force before I was. And half of them actually had internships with space companies prior to the training they went into. And I hope many of them came up to the Seattle area. That would be fantastic. We built our first budget. And so the program objective memorandum, the 5-year budget, was built for the first time and controlled for the first time by the Space Force this past year. Now, because we have a new administration, we're still working through the what end game is, or the final content of our 22 budget. But a little over a year ago, the Air Force carved out 10% of the Department of the Air Force budget and gave it to the Space Force. So that was about $15.4 billion. And that was largely the programs, the investments that were already space related. So basically took space dollars, gave it to the Space Force, and we had quite a year of basically learning how to, how shall I say, defend our budget and explain what we need, provide the analysis that we had, underpinning our priorities, describe the investments that we need and defend them. For me, that was a huge learning experience. And now that is Lieutenant General Bill LaCourie, who's responsible for building the budget. So he's in that those days of final review right now with the Office of Secretary of Defense as we finalize our budget for 22. But it is still exciting that we're getting to do this for ourselves for the first time. We stood up our own headquarters staff, of course. I'm the director of staff. We stood up our first field command. That's the Space Operations Command, still at Air Force Space Command, headquarters there, Building 1 in Colorado Springs. But it is now, officially the organization under Space Command. We have 2 more field commands to go, and we're working on that organization right now. We transferred 23 Air Force organizations into the Space Force. These were organizations that were part of the Air Force, but doing space missions or attached to space missions, and they came over this past year. We published our first doctrine document, which I love to talk about, mostly because there are about 22 airmen at the time who came together. They weren't directed. They came together and wrote this. And I'm just blown away by the kinds of the perspective they had and what they knew was important to codify into doctrine. And so we have our first piece of doctrine. It's our capstone, and it is well read by guardians in your United States Space Force. Also, the Chief of Space Operations, General Raymond, wrote planning guidance where he highlighted his top 5 priorities. Those priorities are number 1, empower a lean and agile service. That's what we're going to be. Number 2, develop joint warfighters and world-class teams. And 3, deliver new capabilities at operationally relevant speeds. I think we all know that that has to move a little faster. Number 4 is integrate. Number 5 is innovate. And there are several tasks underneath those 5 priorities, tasks and objectives that, of course, yours truly is responsible for organizing the staff to do all that work. We've graduated our first basic military training, our first NCO Academy. Our boss is officially on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That happened on our first birthday on the 20th of December. And then on the 8th of January, we became the 18th member of the IC, the intelligence community. All really cool and amazing and fun things that have happened in year 1. So the way General Raymond talks about year 1, that was invention. Year 1, he invented the Space Force. Year 2, he says, this is the year of integration. We need to integrate. Having built the service, now we need to integrate it and unleash it, he says. Like I've said a couple times, there's no joint force capability that operates without space. Therefore, we're going to have to integrate this new service into the DoD, the Joint Force, the interagency, with commercial and industry, with allies and partners. This is year 2 is the year of integration, and a couple of outcomes that we're expecting this year that will be very helpful for continuing the 5 priorities that the boss laid out, and also kind of infusing us deeper into the other services. We're going to finish our human capital strategy. We have the opportunity here as a new service to build a new kind of joint warfighter, a space operator that understands the joint world. And then when we go into the joint world, we want to help the joint world understand space. This strategy will help us optimize our talent management, optimize how we do everything from recruit to retain to retire, and all that amazing development and cultivation that needs to happen in between. We're looking at how we interact with the Guard and Reserve. They are integral to what we do today. And so we're working with OSD and OMB, the Office of Management Budget. We're working with Congress to see what we can design and hopefully design something that's a little more permeable, so that when guardians hit times in their life where they want to either have children or finish a degree, or maybe there's an elder parent they want to take care of, or just basically when life happens, is there a way to allow and design the Space Force to be a little bit more permeable for people? This would also allow, if you think about it, the exquisite talent that our reserve and guardsmen have in their day jobs they're exquisitely talented, and to be able to develop that and then come back in, share it with the service, and then learn, more what we're doing on the military side, and then come back out. This kind of a design could be very helpful for all of us. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of a force design. We are going to publish a force design this year. And it's well, we are working on standing up an analysis center. It'll be run by Mr. Andrew Cox, and if you're familiar with Andrew, you know that he currently operates SSDP, which is Strategic Space Development Program, but he's going to we're going to take that, which was partnered at Air Force Space Command. We're going to basically bring that up to our level, the service level, and that will be our analytics center. It'll be the analysis machine that underpins the decisions that we have to make on investment, the decisions that we have to make on concepts, con ops. They'll be doing war fighting, exercising, helping us prototype capabilities. So I'm really excited about what the force design will look like this year. And we're going to do it mission area by mission area. So if you think of the architecture of missile warning, for example, right now, where we have space-based infrared system in GEO, we have some ground systems as well that help with dual phenomenology. We need to, and like I mentioned before, create a hybrid type of architecture where those missile warning sensors are not solely in GEO, and they're certainly not the large, expensive, exquisite programs moving forward. We're talking about smaller, cheaper satellites in other various orbits. We're talking about other types of capabilities that can be, designed to provide a more resilient missile warning capability for the nation. So that's just one example of how a new force design will help inform our investments in the Space Force. So there's certainly no lack of work that we're doing, no shortage of it. And so, to get to the questions that are on people's minds, I think what I'll do is pause here, thank you for inviting me, and tell you that I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General, for those wonderful comments. We already have so many questions in the chat. Let me begin by asking you a question that comes out of the Space Power Doctrine capstone. And that's also important to me, both personally and professionally. As you know, today is 3/11. I was on the ground with my family in Japan when the largest, one of the world's largest earthquakes hit on 3/11.
Oh.
I almost lost our family, got a very clear sense of the role that space assets might play in disaster management, but also saw, very importantly, the importance of resilience in military alliances and partnerships.
Yes.
I know the Space Force Doctrine is very clear on that. And I wondered if you could reflect a little bit for us about the ways in which you're thinking about integrating in your second year the idea of building and stabilizing alliances in a world that is in such geopolitical flux.
Thank you for that question. Our alliances are, we definitely need to build them, but I have to back up probably almost 33 years now. My first assignment. I was at Beale Air Force Base, and there's a phased array radar there. It's PAWS West, basically designed to detect incoming ballistic missiles. And it also reaches low Earth orbit, and so helps track satellites and other objects in space in the low Earth orbit. So definitely part of the Space Force now. But back then, the real significant relationship was with NORAD, and so I had Canadians not only in our operations crew force, but on my crew. And I learned from the very beginning. In fact, one of the first people I met was a Canadian. I learned from the very beginning that alliance was so strong. The Australians are fantastic and close partners, and of course the Five Eye, where you add New Zealand, and we've gone beyond that with Germany and France. UK was in the Five Eyes. We have a close partnership with Japan. We're working on putting a sensor on one of their position navigation and timing systems called QZSS, Quasi-Zenith Space System. And as you probably know, QZSS does kind of like almost like, it looks like a figure 8 orbit on the map. And you know, it's for Japanese PNT. We tried, actually, I was at Air Force Space Command a few years ago where we tried really hard to put our own GPS type of sensor on QZSS. And that was just, we were running into technical issues, and that became, you know, just too hard. So what we did agree on is a space domain awareness type sensor on QZSS, and that is in work. I don't have the launch date in front of me, but that particular project is going very well. We are adding Japan to the CSPOC, the Combined Space Operations Center there at Vandenberg. That is happening this year. We were really excited a couple of years ago to add Germany and then France, and now it's Japan on that ops floor. We're working with Norway on 2 satellites that will be launched on. It'll carry our communications capability for missile warning, MILSATCOM capability that will be used in the missile warning mission, actually. And that will be a polar orbit. These 2 satellites will carry our payloads, but that saved us something like $900 million to partner with Norway. Again, I don't have that launch date in front of me, but another amazing partnership. And then our newest allies, South Korea, Brazil, and Chile. This past year, we've had talks with all 3 allies, and it's just a reminder that the U.S. doesn't go anywhere alone. We don't do it alone around the world, and we certainly don't do it alone in space. So the notion that building alliances is key to success is not lost on the Space Force.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, General. We have so many questions. Let me, I'll pick and choose a few that are coming out of the chat room here. Let me begin, first of all, with the first question that we received. And this is from, I believe this is from Charlie Galland. Charlie Galliand. And the question, 2-part, my Army F-40 counterparts are considering applying for transition to the Space Force. Would you expect them to be matched to 13S positions, or would it be dependent on their background? That's the first question. And the second question is, I'm in a great position here and I love what I do. He is a major in exchange instructor in the physics and nuclear engineering department at West Point. He wants to know, would the USSF consider putting a liaison position at USMA like there is for USMC?
The answer to both of those questions is we are exploring all options, I would say. I don't think I can specifically say that any particular MOS, if you will, I think that's the Army term, and we say AFSC, Air Force Specialty Code. We're still using Air Force. I don't think we're necessarily going to tell you you have to plug and play. Certainly, we're looking for the talent of FA-40s. We're looking for the talent, of people who want to be in the Space Force, number one, who want to be innovative and agile and creative, and who want to be bold and help this new service stand on its feet, stand on its own, and deliver the kinds of capability our nation needs. Liaison officers, we are exploring, especially in for our academic and education type of arrangements. We are definitely looking at liaison officers. And let me just say one other thing about this. As I was explaining this idea of permeability, we're really looking at the structure of a career. And I think and the guys that ask the question particularly, or people I should say ask the question, you may know that a lot of our career milestones were really kind of born out of what a pilot had to do, a fighter pilot in particular, where especially if you're an operator, the next thing you want to do after you master your system is to be an instructor or an evaluator. Then you want to lead a flight. Then you want to go be an operations officer, and you have to go to the specific professional military education in between. And so all of these milestones we've inherited, and maybe, just maybe, they aren't particularly what we need to be doing to grow the types of bold leaders we need in the Space Force. Potentially we could do things differently, and we're looking very clear-eyed at all those different choices right now.
Fantastic. Just following up on that, I believe this is a student here, and he is asking whether are there any plans to allow current cadets of other service components with STEM degrees to cross-commission over to the Space Force as 2 LTs rather than transferring later on? It's a student question.
Yes, no, that is a great question, Professor, and I do believe we're working in that direction. That is, so year 1 was all about transferring Air Force and as I mentioned, Air Force Academy graduates into the Space Force. We are pretty close to being done with that, and year 2 is now the other services. So as we look at Army, Navy, and Marine Corps transfers, we will also be looking at the commissioning sources for Army, Navy, and Marine Corps as well. Yes.
Thank you, General. And just to mention, that was Alex Villad, a student here. Next question is from Livingston Holder. General, how concerned are you with kinetic warfare in orbit? What potential hostile actions in space concern you the most?
Kinetic is quite disturbing. Let me get my note here on exactly what's going on. Where did I put it? Well, I'm just going to have to go from the top of my head, which is okay. The Russians especially are working recently on ASATs. So this is a kinetic kill vehicle launched from the ground. In 2020, they were quite active. They had a test launch in July. They had another test launch in December. And I am really happy that I can be talking to you about this because we realize, and our boss, General Raymond, realizes, we have to start talking about the threats that we see. And this is a very particularly concerning threat. So, it's even worse by the fact that they are actively working on a mobile ground-launched ASAT system. And that program is called the NUDOL, NUDOL. They are working on on-orbit type of anti-satellites as well. And we think that will also be a kinetic type of kill. And kinetic weapons are irresponsible, especially if they're high debris. And it's very concerning that not only would our satellites be at risk and those of our allies, but that the very domain they operate in could be diminished and damaged as well. So thank you for that question.
Great question. I'm just going to skip one question ahead and then come back to, because this follows on about US-Russia dialogue. And this is a question from Nikita Shestakov. The Space Force leader, General Raymond, recently has noted to journalists that he supports the idea of developing the Russia-US dialogue on space security. Could you comment on this issue?
Yes, I would. The more we talk, the better it is. And this is with any potential adversary. We want to have talks with China too, but certainly a Russia dialogue would be very, very beneficial for all sides. I've even had well, when I was at Strategic Command, I was the J5 there, the director of plans. So I had well, I was responsible for all of our plans, and if you know Stratcom, those are our nuclear plans. The hotline that we have between Russia and the United States is so important to keep. Any type of communication is very, very important, and in the space domain, it's even more so today, because there are no rules. It's the Wild West. I mean, when you talk about the actual laws that apply to space, there's only a couple of them, and they basically tell you don't put nukes in space and use space peacefully. Beyond that, it is quite a Wild West, and we've seen activities that the Russians are doing. Not only those launches I mentioned, but I think you might have heard General Raymond talk about the Russian doll satellite that has basically a mothership, and then out of the mothership comes another satellite, and then we even observed something else coming out of the smaller satellite. Very concerning. So we want to be able to talk about rules of engagement, talk about norms in space, and it's probably along the lines of partnership and engagement, the most important thing we could do in year 2 here. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And on that particular issue, I think I will, you spoke about establishing norms and rules potentially. I have a question from PJ Blunt. And just in the interest of disclosure, PJ Blunt is my co-editor for the Oxford Handbook of Space Security, which will be coming out shortly. And we are sort of going around the world trying to figure out what everybody else is doing. But PJ is asking, what roles do norms play in securing US space assets, and what role would USF play in developing those norms? Are there any specific norms that you think need to be established to help maintain a stable and secure space domain?
I think norms, as far as norms of behavior, rules of encroachment, how close one object can get to another before it's considered a threatening distance. How satellites, if they're moving into a threatening position, something like a coplanar type of position, what are the behaviors that we as a nation, not only as a nation, as an international community, what behaviors do we consider to be appropriate? And it's important for the Space Force, important for any militaries in space, because you need to understand what those red lines are, and as we grow our capability to understand what other countries are doing in space, so as we grow our space domain awareness capabilities, and we see more and more, we need to understand, we all collectively need to understand what threatening behavior looks like so that we don't react inappropriately to another nation's maneuvering in space.
Thank you, General. I'm going back up the chain, and the question is: with the establishment of the Space Force, do you envision creating a U.S. Space Force Academy and Space Force Office of Science Research?
I would love to. Okay, so, but in these early years, we are relying very heavily on organizations that already exist, to include the Air Force. So, as you know, we are under the Department of the Air Force. The department has the United States Air Force, the United States Space Force, and because the notion was to create a small and mission-focused service, we rely on the Air Force for almost everything that is not mission. So much is relied on the Air Force. For example, medical, legal, all of our docs and lawyers are going to stay in the, well, I shouldn't be so declarative, but for the most part, our reliance is going to be on the Air Force for that kind of thing. We're working right now with the Air Force on what does that mean for installation support? What is the Air Force going to do for the Space Force regarding installation support, and vice versa? But it is therefore not in our short-term view to create a Space Force Academy. We will be going to the Air Force Academy, from which I'm a proud graduate, and we will be commissioning directly from the Air Force Academy into the Space Force, like we did this past year. We're working, the other organization you mentioned makes me just want to comment very quickly that we're working very closely with the Air Force Research Lab to carve out a specific piece. There's an organization, an activity that's happening at Kirtland that's going to be Space Force owned, but you run into a lot of organizations that are really good at having matrixed their talent and optimize their talent across their entire organization. So if you start ripping space only out of these organizations, then you tear up, you basically leave a mess behind, and we don't want to do that either. So we're being very careful, in particular when we work with other organizations, about what we're going to do to stand up, what is Space Force, and then what we can continue to work and synergize with the other matrix organizations that are doing phenomenal work already.
Thank you, General. And so Ed Heptour has another follow-on question that I think here at the university we're all interested in. It says, I was told by some U.S. Air Force Academy cadets interested in graduate programs at UW that UW is not an approved Space Force university. What do we need to do to become an approved Space Force university? I think this is a question to which we're all interested in the answer.
Actually, I'm going to step in on this one, Sadia. So we actually are working on that in the department. It's already underway. So
okay.
Thank you.
Good.
We're on top of it. It's just paperwork. It's all fun.
Oh, fantastic. And that's Christy Morganson, the other co-director, I think, General, just to let you know. Good.
Nice, I'm glad nice to meet you.
I'm glad to hear that. Let me go back up. This is a question from Matt Gebert. For offensive capabilities, what options, I think a very important question, what options are being explored that don't create debris? Do these capabilities overlap with commercial on-orbit servicing?
Well, let me see what I can talk about here. For protect and defend in space, let me start talking about the defenses, because that's a little easier. And our offensive capabilities we want to keep classified for a while as we're working through this. so for defenses, I can tell you that today, all of our satellites are completely vulnerable. They just are, and so are the commercial, by the way. But our military satellites were designed, built, conceived of back when the domain was completely benign. There was a nice lull in there after the Soviet Union went away. There was a nice lull of peace and benign activity in space, and therefore our systems don't have defenses. But if you think about the threats that are coming, then you think about the kinds of things that we're going to need to do. And so that means if there's an anti-satellite, either missile or a co-orbital coming at a satellite, our satellite's going to have to move out of the way. And so we're talking about, and be able to see that it's coming. So we're talking about adding capabilities like extra propulsive capabilities to be able to move out of the way, onboard type of sensing that you can, a satellite can, have some kind of early warning of another system or a missile coming its way. Those types of capabilities would be on board. We're looking at off board types of capabilities. If you think about in the air domain, how you have fighter escort, that kind of a thing. So that's really, all the detail I could provide on defenses and potential offenses. And then the other part of that question, though, was important. What was the last part of that question, if I can ask, Professor?
No, it's, let me just go back here. Do these capabilities overlap with commercial on-orbit service?
On-orbit servicing.
We're dealing with dual-use technology, so.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a really important piece of this, because today we actually want commercial to continue to build on-orbit servicing type of capabilities. And then once those are built out a little more, potentially even proven, then either the service can contract for a commercial service for onboard servicing, or we can either contract for it or potentially build our own. But we would like to rely on the commercial capability, the commercial industry for that right now. And there's a lot of dual use type of technologies that it would be great to partner on. That's why it's important for you all to understand the issues we're dealing with in space, the types of what we think a future force design looks like with the hybrid architectures I'm talking about, so that we can partner on commercial and military capabilities. In fact, commercial capabilities could be part of this hybrid schema I'm talking about, where we're using commercial SATCOM, for example, either leased or purchased, or however we can do it, to ultimately what this does is complicate Red's targeting of blue capabilities in the domain.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think, in the interest of time, there's so many questions. I'm going to skip a few and try to take questions that are from people who haven't had a chance yet to ask questions. This is a question from one of our resident astronauts, Soyoon Yi. She is from South Korea. South Korea is, I believe, first female astronaut. And her question is, what is the biggest change or challenge from the time when all the space-related security defense was done under the Air Force to the time that we have the Space Force? What are some of the challenges in that transition? What do you think were some of the biggest challenges in those transitions?
Challenges in the transition?
From when all the space-related security defense was done under the U.S. Air Force to the time that we're going to do it, sort of in a comprehensive fashion, concentrated in the U.S. Space Force.
Okay. Well, first, congratulations on being the first female astronaut. I think that's absolutely awesome.
Thank you very much.
You'll represent your country very well. And I love our partnership with South Korea is growing in the space in this space operations business as well. I really love our partnership. So congrats to you. As far as transition, the things that we find the most difficult, as you would probably, if you were to imagine, I shouldn't say it like this, but some kind of a separation. I almost said divorce, but it's not a divorce. It's not a divorce. But if you can imagine some kind of separation, oh, I'm going to get clobbered for that one. If you can imagine that, what do you kind of fight about, or what are the most difficult things to deal with? It's money, it's people, and it's facilities, or where people are sitting. And right here in the Pentagon, we're trying to bed down the Space Force, and so office space, the kinds of facilities and things that people need, to and then to be on par with the Air Force that way, on par. Parity is a big deal, even though we're going to be a tenth the size of the Air Force. Parity is important to the Space Force. So it's the kinds of things that you would think that would be the toughest, and that is money, manpower, and real estate, if you will, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm going to wrap two questions together that has to do with the expanding mission of the Space Force. This is from Richard Lane and Abraham Budge. The question is, what are the plans for future expansion as research and commercial companies push our boundaries from Earth into space? Is there a 20, 30-year plan for expansion as companies like SpaceX plan on sending humans to Mars?
Yeah.
And also, will you be involved with planetary defenses from possible NEO and asteroid impact? So a little bit more about the future missions, where the role that the U.S. Space Force can play.
These are great questions. Definitely not a year two topic, which is kind of like our focus. We don't yet have a 30-year plan like this, but we do recognize that the expansion beyond the bounds of gravity is happening. I don't know if you all saw the announcement that Russia and China are partnering on a lunar station of some kind. We do not today have plans to put Space Force boots on the moon, but we do recognize the economic value of the cislunar area. We also understand that as the moon gets used for exploration, as Mars gets used for expansion and exploration, there may be a need for military defenses and protection and that kind of thing. And so, yes, we will be looking at that. And I just need to say that today, we do have our hands full with protecting and defending in the orbits that are bound by Earth's gravity. So that's going to be our first few years, really concentrating on getting that right. That's why we were established. And then as we mature, we will be definitely working toward expansion with well, I shouldn't say the military will expand, because I don't have the authority to make those decisions, but we will certainly be looking at the needs and requirements for a military type of protection in those expanded regions in the future. Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. So this actually follows on from your remark. This is from General Sandy Finnan. She is over at the Pacific Northwest Nuclear Lab. Maybe each other. It is, she's asking, well, with increased commercial assets in space, do you see a role for Space Force in defending US-based commercial assets?
That is an awesome question. I knew I would get a really hard one from General Finnan. Okay, so I read the it was a policy document, and it basically lays out the responsibility of protecting and defending military, commercial, and allies in space. And it lays that on the U.S. Space Force. So that it will be another expansion area for us. We're starting, just because of how nascent we are and what we can do in these first few years, we have to figure out how to protect and defend our military systems first. And our commercial partners understand this. They're not looking for protection, right out of the gate, but I do believe they'll want to join us in that norms of behavior discussion, because that could be very helpful. And that could protect without doing anything active, I should say. It's be more of a passive protection if we all agree to norms of behavior and rules of engagement in the space domain. But Sandy, you're right. The policy says we will, and so therefore we will figure it out. But today we're concentrating on military first.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, and
Please.
for everything you're doing.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, generals. I think we have time for just one more question. I think we could keep you here really for another hour or so, if not more. But this is a question from Stan Schull, who is in the community here and a tremendous organizer for things that relate to space events and policies here in the region. Stan is asking, how are things progressing on aligning the various Space Force procurement organizations while preserving agility? Is consensus emerging on how to organize the procurement function without losing the unique strengths and capabilities of these different organizations?
Yeah, I think Stan is talking about aligning the Space and Missile Systems Center, our Space RCO, Rapid Capabilities Office, and the Space Domain, the Space Defense Agency, because they all have different roles. And so the answer is yes, and very soon you'll see how we've done it. It would be premature to describe this exactly, and it would be in advance of an announcement, but the answer is absolutely yes. And it's not to eliminate any of these organizations, but it is to figure out how to synchronize their activities and align their activities so that we're not, disparately working on various things. The Space and Missile Systems Center brings an expertise. The Space RCO brings an expertise, and so does the Space Defense Agency. And we are working to synchronize and align them. And so that will get after your procurement question, but even more importantly, it'll start at concept. It'll start at concept development. It'll start even, earlier in the analysis that we do in the early designing and conception phases. So we're definitely going to synchronize all of these elements. Absolutely.
And that brings us very nicely back to the introduction and your 4 Ps, General, your policy, plans, positions, and procedures. Thank you so much for joining us today. There's still so many questions. I hope you will come back and join us again at the University of Washington Space Policy and Research Center. Tell us in year 2 how well things are going in terms of integration as you continue to build out your Space Force. Thank you again. Please join me, everybody, in thanking the General for being with us today. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks, everybody. Let me come to Seattle next time.
Yes, absolutely. We would love to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.